Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 16th of May, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henninsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
And also welcome to David Scott from Northern Exposure and Katy-Jo Murfin as well. So let's get straight on with this. Boris is in Northern Ireland today. He's heading over there with a clear message, he says. The UK government will play its part to ensure political peace and democracy, but the parties must come together to restore power sharing and tackle cost of living pressures. So he's published an article in the Belfast Telegraph all about this. Stormont must be restored so politicians can deliver for the people of Northern Ireland. That's really good. And so what's going on here is that because of the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, which basically drew a border up the Irish Sea, the unionist parties, and particularly the DUP, are refusing to put people forward for a new executive in Northern Ireland, and so there can be no Northern Ireland Assembly over there. So let's see what Boris has said in his article. Here he is, quite appropriate image there. The government's commitment to the union is above politics, he says. So the union is secure. That is the implication. Now, do we believe that? Well, we'll see whether we believe that a little later. But anyway, he said this, it is because of the complexities of the situation that the protocol exists. It's why the protocol was agreed in good faith, and it's why those who want to scrap the protocol rather than seeking changes are focusing on the wrong thing. So anybody that's criticizing the Northern Ireland Protocol is doing the wrong thing. And he said, we've been told by the EU that it's impossible to make changes to the protocol text to actually solve these problems in negotiations because there's no mandate to do so. And he ended up by saying, I hope the EU's position changes. If it does not, there'll be a necessity to act. But he doesn't quite say what that action would be. So the question is, can any word that comes out of Boris Johnson's mouth be trusted? Well, let's go back to, let's see, it was 2020. And this was the headline. This was the mainstream media was quoting Boris Johnson at that time as saying, over my dead body, will there be a border down the Irish Sea? The problem was that wasn't quite what he said, David, because this is, if you have a look at this, he said, there will be no border down the Irish Sea over my dead body. Now, I'm sorry, I may not be great at English, David, but that seems to be 180 degrees out from what the mainstream press said. So the question was, did he choose this form of choose this form of words in order to deliberately mislead, because he knew that the media would present this in a particular way, or were the media briefed to present it in a particular way? But either way, it was less than honest at the time for him to make that statement, because he knew very well that it was going to end up being a border down the Irish Sea. There could be no other option, actually, because as Britain left the EU, the main requirement was to keep the Northern Irish border open as per the agreement.
Well, this is the same Boris who said, with regards to the infamous letter that he was being forced to send to the EU by our rump parliament, that he would rather die in a ditch than sign it. And then he signed it.
Okay, so look, bottom line here, Patrick, is that my view on this is that what the protocol does is it creates an all-Ireland economy. That's de facto United Ireland, and at least with respect to that. There's merely some minor politics to deal with in order to make the thing a done deal. I think when he claims that he's, the union is above politics and is, basically unchangeable, I think he's not telling the truth.
Well, there's some structural forces at play. And again, this is more or less unavoidable. We spoke at length about this, didn't we?
Yes.
During the whole Brexit farrago, and pointed out the fact that, the Good Friday Agreement and the fact that that was helped midwifed by none other than Michel Barnier at the time, the EU minister. It's a lot easier when both sides are under the European Union umbrella. Then it becomes tricky. It becomes a technical problem, a structural issue after Brexit. So unfortunately, there might be some side effects to this course of events.
Yes. Okay. Well, look, let's move on to economy and cost of living issues, David, because we're going to talk about food security and so on in a second, and energy prices. But as a sort of lead into that, You want to cover a little bit on the Bank of England's recent monetary policy report?
Yes, I thought it'd be interesting just to have a look at how sterling, how reliable the Bank of England has been. So I've got here a little review of the last year on monetary policy reports. So let's go back to May 2021, and we have here a little warning from the bank. It's not so good. You see, the inflation is too low. It's below our 2% target. But don't worry, it's going to come back up, and here's the graph, right? So in 6 months or so, it'll be almost 2%. So that'll be okay. That's close enough. So although inflation's too low, we think it's going to be okay. So that's the message 1 year ago. So if we go forward a quarter, this takes us to August 2021. And inflation is above our 2% target. And we expect it to rise further. Oh, that's a bit embarrassing. But then it's going to fall back down to the target. Again, we have a graph. And there's the graph now. It's now past 2%, heading straight up. But the prediction is within 6 months, it's going to peak. And it's going to come back obediently back down to the Bank of England target. So it'll all be fine. And don't worry about a thing, but 4%. It could get as high as 4%. So this is a big change. So if we then go forward another quarter to the November policy report, we expect inflation to rise to 5% in the spring and then fall back. We said 4%. It's actually 5%. You know, we were a little optimistic, but don't worry. You know, it's going to fall back. 'Cause it's going to go up in the spring. And it's then going to fall back, and we have a graph. This is what we're predicting. So it's going to go up for another 9 months, and then it's going to fall obediently back to right on the 2%. So we'll be good. Around about 2024, we will be fine. And if we go forward another 3 months, February 2022, we expect inflation to rise to 7% in the spring and then fall back. So 4% wasn't right, 5%, but 7%. That's where we're going to stop. And then it's going to fall back. And again, we have a graph. And there we go. So it's now going up. As you see, the actual line, it's just going straight up. But it's okay because in 6 months' time, it's going to turn. And it's going to come back down to less than 2%. We'll be fine. We'll be absolutely fine. Don't you worry about it, gentlemen. And then we come to May 2022, we expect inflation to rise to 10% this year and the economy to slow. Reasons? Russia's invasion of the Ukraine has led to large increases in the price of things like energy and food. Good to know that they recognise that energy and food are in fact things. It's that sort of astute analysis that we go to the Bank of England for. So there's going to be a further rise in the price cap on energy. Both the war and the lockdowns in China are making it harder to import things. This is going to push up goods prices. As a result of these factors, so that's China, Putin, and energy prices, nothing to do with the Bank of England, you understand, then prices are going to go up by around 10% this year. The UK economy has been recovering from the effects of COVID, but we expect the increase in cost of living to lead to slower overall growth. And we've got a chart of the growth. Now, when they say slower, what they actually mean is none. They're predicting almost no growth in 2022, nothing at all in 2023, and nothing at all in 2024.
Yeah, but so David, it's fair enough because none is less than almost none.
Yes, it is. Now, they're predicting high inflation and economic stagnation. Now, I grew up in the 70s, Mike. I can remember a word. What was the word now? Stagflation, yes. The Bank of England are telling us that stagflation cometh, which is very good because that's exactly a year and a half after the Mises Institute told us that stagflation was coming. But they've got there in the end. And we have another little graph here. This is the one on inflation. This is the current inflation prediction. So it's going to, you see that the actual is still going straight up. It's past 6%, heading for 7%. Well, it's going to go up for another 9 months, and then it's going to turn down and obediently come right the way back down to 1%. So it'll be fine. Don't you worry about it at all, but it's now 10% inflation. Now, there's been many reasons given for this, Putin being one of them. The one that I didn't see the Bank of England mentioning was this. This is the United Kingdom Bank of England quantitative easing total, £875 billion. This is money printing, an injection of the money into the economy, which obviously steals value from existing money in circulation and is, by definition, inflation. Not a word about that from the Bank of England. They were silent on that. Now, this is obviously starting to look a little bit embarrassing, and politicians are starting to notice, and so are the financial papers. So here we have the Financial Times. Bank of England faces its biggest inflation challenge since it became independent. Chris Giles writes, after the Lord's Economic Affairs Committee accused the Bank of England of a dangerous addiction to quantitative easing and pumping up spending each time things look difficult. Yes, that is spot on. That is their policy. The central bank needs to decide how quickly to withdraw the stimulus and rein in inflation. I think it's the big moment for central banks because they really have to demonstrate that they are. This is a quote from Murfin, the former head of the Bank of England. I think this is a big moment for central banks because they really have to demonstrate that they're determined to restore price stability. It's too late to argue that we've got a few months of high inflation and it will go away. It's more a question of a few years, the former governor said. And here we have the Bank of England taking all of those inflation predictions and putting them on one chart, which is a kind of funny chart because you see here the inflation predictions were consistently wrong, consistently way too low. But the only thing that the Bank of England is certain on is by the middle of 2024, she'll be fine. All right, all the predictions come back down to the required 2% range in the middle of 2024. That's consistent, and I don't know if you believe that, Mike. I have my doubts.
I don't believe it for a second. Let's just put that on record.
David, do you think that's likely to peak out at 10%, or are the British financial authorities doing the same game they play in the United States, which is to juggle the CPI, throw in all sorts of things that really don't jump in price in order to suppress the inflation rate and leave out all the expensive things like fuel and the cost of living and so forth?
Yes, we're already doing that, and we've still got 10%. This is the adjusted rate. This is the official rate. And I don't think it'll stop at 10%. They've not been right so far. Why would they suddenly start being right now? We have here, one of the effects of this is, of course, strange things happening in the mortgage market. Here we've got UK banks pull mortgage deals as borrowers rush to lock in rates. So rates are spiking, and there is a frantic effort to try and get them fixed. So this is, Financial Times continues, the delays threaten to disrupt housing chains, causing buyers to push for faster processing for fear of deals falling through. Those in a chain are particularly affected since a failed or delayed mortgage application for one buyer can upset the plans of multiple participants. Sellers are wanting people to exchange quicker, but the problem is the banks are all taking longer. As a result, cash buyers have become more attractive to sellers because they avoid the mortgage application process and are often free of a property buying chain. We are seeing more cash purchases through our agency partners. This is helpful because it can break a chain. Now, this is interesting because there's a rush from cash to real assets. This is another bit of evidence of what we were talking about last week, the crack-up boom. As money loses its value, and it's losing value at 10% a year at the moment, saving becomes much less attractive, and you want to get rid of the cash as quickly as possible and get it into something real. So we're seeing cash buyers go into the housing market. This is a very a sign of great economic distress, and we're seeing similar signs all across the world.
David, I think the other point to make here is that the only reason that house prices haven't started coming down yet is because although mortgage rates are starting to rise, they're not rising to a level yet where people are starting to suffer. And because there's this cash coming into the housing market, as you say, that is keeping prices inflation. But in the meantime, people that are trying to sell their homes don't have any particular urgency to do that, so they can wait out the chain if necessary. They obviously would prefer to have a cash buyer, but they can wait it out at this point. When we start sticking another 3, 4, 5% on that, then perhaps that pressure starts to get a bit higher for them to move their homes on. And at that point, we might start seeing house prices, coming down again?
Well, this is very likely, but we have to remember right now, Mike, that it's the most easy money position that I can remember. We never had this in the 1970s. The Bank of England base rate is 1%, right? Inflation's going to be 10%. Well, that's a real interest rate of -9%. It's -6% just now. So this is telling people to load up on debt, and people will still be responding to that incentive. Now, when the crunch finally comes, they'll be in a worse position than ever, and the crunch will come. But at the moment, we've got real interest rates of -6%. We never had that in the 1970s. We've never had it in living memory. I suspect we've never had it at all.
Yes.
Certainly not up to -9%. And this is going to encourage people, at least for a little while longer, people and companies, to maximize the debt and minimize holding cash.
When we talk about the crunch, bear in mind that the crunch is going to be targeting a certain section of the home owners than others. So you've got the big institutional investment giants. In America, you've probably heard about BlackRock scooping up properties.
Yes.
Well, a lot of people aren't aware they're doing that in the UK as well. They're just doing it through their subsidiaries, you could say unofficial subsidiaries like Lloyds Bank, Legal & General, Granger PLC. You'll find that BlackRock and some of these big mega giants from the US are major shareholders in all of those institutions. And who will be targeted? The middle class homeowner, people who do buy-to-lets, people who run Airbnbs. And it only takes the government changing, for instance, council tax schemes. We're starting to see talk about raising council tax for people who run their property like a business, green energy requirements to upgrade to be carbon compliant, as it were. All these things will add to the cost of owning the property, and then also the move to give tenants all sorts of rights and take them away, or have the homeowner be responsible for council tax, for instance. All of these things will squeeze the middle class homeowner and will move those properties up to the big institutional buyers. And so these are the trends, and this collusion between government and these big institutions to squeeze out these homeowners who all got into the property market over the last 30 years. That's the thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, okay, well, let's move on then to energy prices. And as everybody in the UK will know, at least, there is a price cap on consumer energy prices. That price cap was lifted heavily in September last year. It was lifted heavily again in March, and this is reviewed every 6 months. But Ofgem is now suggesting that that price cap needs to be reviewed every 3 months. And of course, that's to make sure that the consumer can benefit from falling gas prices if they should ever fall. So they're now proposing that. If we just look at what the situation is with historically with gas prices in the UK, we can see that around the turn of the century, where was that? Around 30. Sorry, I've forgotten the scale on that, but it's pounds obviously for whatever the unit of energy is that they're measuring there. It's up around the 155 level at the moment. It was up around 300 a month or so ago. So it has come down somewhat, but it's still massively higher than it was at the turn of the century. So we're going to reconsider the price cap on a much more regular basis so that we can make sure that people benefit from falling prices. But I'm not certain that that is a likelihood in the next little period. But let's come on to food, because of course that's the other big issue, and everybody would be glad to know that Liz Truss, as we mentioned on Friday, was at the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Germany, and they were talking about, they released a communique on food security. This is what they had to say. We will address, including in support of the United Nations Global Crises Response Group, the causes and consequences of the global food crisis through a global alliance for food security. So as we are saying with health, with international treaties and global treaties for dealing with pandemics for the future, we're likely to see similar types of global governance forming for food security. Okay, this is one of the comments they made during this: to foster sustainable practices, to reduce food waste and loss, and where this is possible, sustainably increase our own production of agricultural products in line with the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, while protecting climate, biodiversity, and the environment, in particular tackling climate and biodiversity challenges. So we're not going to worry too much about food security, actually, because it's only where it's possible to fit it in around climate change and biodiversity and the environment and so on, that we need to worry about that. And of course, that is already seen in British government policy. So this is Michael Gove going back to 2019, talking about leaving the EU. And of course, we're leaving the Common Agricultural Policy there. And he's saying we have a historic opportunity to deliver a farming policy which works for the whole industry. But what did that mean? That meant this. That meant that he would be encouraging sustainable farming, fitting in with Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, and so on, and particularly the Environmental Land Management Scheme to incentivize sustainable farming practices, create habitats for nature recovery, and establish new woodland to help tackle climate change. Now, what that means, create habitats for nature recovery, that means stop producing food and replace the farmland for producing food with something else. So it went on to say direct payments will be reduced fairly. This is under the Common Agricultural Policy, starting from the 2021 Basic Payment Scheme year, with the money released being used to fund new grants and schemes to boost farmers' productivity and reward environmental improvements. Well, that's fork-tongue language there, because of course they weren't boosting farmers' productivity. They were mainly rewarding so-called environmental improvements. So we have a little bit of video here. This is Harry Metcalf, and he runs a YouTube channel. He's a farmer in England. He runs a YouTube channel called Harry's Farm, amongst others. And he was commenting a couple of days ago on what he's seeing on the land around his farm. So let's just have a look at this.
The other thing that's going on, I've noticed around here, are all the environmental schemes you are now seeing in the fields. Obviously this is a field of wheat, but I can look around my neighbours and suddenly these sort of wildflower mixes are all now very visible. And those are the guys who have taken up the environmental schemes that the government's made available. And they're around £600-ish a hectare you receive for growing wildflowers, etc., and pollen nectar mixes. That is also making the grain price go up, because quite a lot of land, especially on the marginal areas around where I farm in the Cotswold, no end of people have entered this scheme, and that's probably reduced the actual UK harvest by 1 million tonnes, is what my grain merchant was telling me the other day. But it's very visible now, and you can understand, because it's guaranteed income.
So let's just think about that, David. He's talking about the price of grain going up. Well, of course it's going to go up because of lack of availability, but 1 million tonnes less grain produced in the UK as a result of these land management schemes. Where's the food security in that? If Britain is already only 60% food independent, and in fact, if you're a vegan, it's actually up around the 80% mark in terms of, in terms of imports, so it's only 20% food independent. Where is this taking us?
Well, it's certainly not taking us towards food security. It's not taking us towards strategic security, and it's destroying the farming industry as an industry capable of producing a product that people actually want, and making it ever more dependent on just straight government handouts and subsidies, and that will corrode its abilities in the longer term to produce at all. If you've got a field and you're getting a guaranteed government income, like a pension or a bailout or a handout, You'll not invest in plant and machinery. You'll not invest in training a workforce. You'll not invest in anything. You'll just take the cash and quietly live off it.
And as we have been reporting in the last couple of weeks, of course, it's not just cash for rewilding, it's also cash for leaving the industry completely. So they're incentivizing people to leave the industry. They're saying this will free up land for younger generations to come in. But of course, those younger generations will have been through the relevant training programs, through the farming colleges and so on, and they will be very enthusiastic to keep going on this trend towards rewilding and so on. So we're taking farmland, productive farmland, we're turning it into wildflower meadows. And in the meantime, we're effectively going to be starving because we're going to see shortages. But look, we got to.
I just want to add, this is a perfect example of when the government gets involved in the economy to manage the economy. The results are just wonderful. What could possibly go wrong? They're literally intervening into the food supply.
Well, yes, indeed. And another area where the government has been managing the economy or stroke destroying it, of course, was COVID policy. Of course, the great manufacturer of the world these days is China. We buy everything from China. We don't have the capability to produce anything in the West anymore. We mainly get our components and so on from China. So I just wanted to remind everybody what is going on in China at the moment. And well, this tweet came out, I think it's about 10 days ago now. We missed it at the time. Let's just have a look at the video here. This is the factory which is producing components for Apple products in particular, and in Shanghai, of course, and they have been experiencing significant lockdowns. So it's Quanta Computer Limited. And so the issue here is that the Chinese have been, because they've been pursuing this zero COVID policy, have set up what they called closed loop production processes. And this is where workers are required to live in on-site dormitories. None of them are allowed to leave or enter the facility for a month or more at a time. So they have suddenly decided to try to fight back on that. But of course, this is one of the things which is absolutely decimating supply chains at the moment, David. And so, you're absolutely right to say quantitative easing, because that's probably the largest component of this. But nonetheless, government policy, and particularly COVID policy, is part and parcel of creating a lack of supply, and therefore inevitably that is going to push pressure on the prices as well.
And let's remember, the Green New Deal is named after FDR's New Deal, during which, in the greatest depression and recession in United States history, the government intervened to prop up farm prices and make food more expensive for the ordinary people by buying the food and destroying it. That's your government working for you.
A practice we still continue to this day.
Well, indeed.
But you get government cheese surpluses, so there's always some benefits. Look, I'll leave this, talk about the energy crisis. The Bank of England, how can they possibly put the war in Russia or Putin as the scapegoat for that? You've got green energy policies, you've got quantitative easing, you've got sanctions. Putin did not jack up the price of energy, sanctions did. And so at every turn you have government policy, which is to blame. And again, they turn around and gaslight the public, as do the media. They don't ask any questions on this and just use the same old blame game. And the public generally are none the wiser, unfortunately.
Indeed. Okay, if you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, then please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. You'd be very welcome there. There are options to help us out, or you can pick something up at the UK column shop. But in any case, if you would share any material you find on the various platforms, that would be absolutely fantastic. So now, NATO and NATO expansion. Let's bring this in. It looks like Sweden and Finland are on the cards, and David's going to cover this in a second, but just as an intro to that.
Sure. And what the big question is this the more Article 5 bait that's being added to NATO's empire, its eastwardly moving empire? This is the question.
Yes, indeed. So, David, the headline here in The Telegraph is Sweden's bid to join NATO shows Vladimir Putin's aggression doesn't pay. Now, this is a quote from Jens Stoltenberg, which we'll see in just 1 second. But what were your thoughts on what the Telegraph had to say?
Well, the Telegraph has given the standard line as to, this is Putin's evil plan has backfired, and isn't this a good thing? But what we're actually seeing here is a secular shift, is a completely root and branch change of the geopolitical landscape and how countries are associating with one another. And it's quite remarkable. 200 years of military neutrality, as is stated on this headline here from Telegraph, has been swept away in weeks. So that settled policy is now a thing of the past. And Sweden is going to be part of NATO, and so is Finland. So you see here all the Nordic countries who have very strong ethnic ties right across to Britain and to Ireland and France, and there are huge ethnic ties here, and you're seeing people who have got a similar origin assemble together into a similar policy in a way that's not really been seen before. A remarkable shift.
Right. Okay. Well, let's just put Stoltenberg on screen, because he did give a little briefing to NATO yesterday, well, let's just see what he had to say about this.
Russia's war in Ukraine is not going as Moscow had planned. They failed to take Kiev. They are pulling back from around Kharkiv. Their major offensive in Donbass has stalled. Russia is not achieving its strategic objectives. President Putin wants Ukraine defeated, NATO down, North America and Europe divided. But Ukraine stands, NATO is stronger than ever, Europe and North America are solidly united.
So, David, first of all, do you think that is an accurate assessment of the situation, that Europe and the United States are united?
It's not an accurate statement of what Putin's strategic objectives were. It's a whole series of straw man arguments. Putin's strategic objectives, as I understand it, were to prevent the Ukraine becoming part of NATO, and to provide a defense to the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass, and to provide a defensible border which would include Crimea and Sevastopol. Those, as I understand it, are his strategic objectives, and I don't see any of those noticeably failing. That's not to say things have gone as they'd hoped, but those strategic objectives look like they are being met. This NATO down, Ukraine defeated, US and EU at each other's throats narrative, none of those things are happening, but did Putin expect them to? Was that what his plan was? I think that's fanciful.
Indeed. But what about Erdogan and Turkey?
Well, this is a very interesting report here from Al Jazeera. So Erdogan says Turkey is opposed to Finland and Sweden entering NATO, and Ankara could block the pair from joining because it requires unanimous agreement. So Turkey's President Erdogan said it's not possible for Ankara to support Sweden and Finland joining a transatlantic military alliance in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, signalling a possible hurdle. Speaking to reporters in Istanbul on Friday, Erdogan said Turkey, which is already part of NATO, did not have positive views on the Scandinavian countries' move to seek membership, accusing them of being guest houses for terrorist organisations. There you go, that's quite a quote. More on that just in a moment, because that objection seems to be being smoothed over. But we'll come to a couple of quotes on that in a moment. So here we have the Times reporting NATO fast-track memberships of Finland and Sweden to minimise the threat from Russia. Here we've got a quote. This is a historic day, a new era begins. I always get nervous when politicians start talking like that. So that's President Niinisto of Finland, and he's announced his country's application for membership. Magdalena Andersson, Prime Minister of Sweden, said her Social Democrats had ditched 200 years of non-alignment. By joining NATO, the board has decided the party will work towards Sweden applying for membership in NATO. She said, committing to one of the biggest geopolitical shifts since the end of the Soviet Union. And Ann Lind, 60, Sweden's foreign minister, hailed a historic decision. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has worsened the security situation for Sweden and for the whole of Europe. So they then continued that the alliance has played down Turkey's criticism of the failure by Finland and Sweden to condemn terrorists, a reference to Kurdish separatist PKK and YPG groups. The group has waged an insurgency against Turkey since 1984, and a conflict has claimed tens of thousands of lives. Turkey has made it clear that its intention is not to block membership, Stoltenberg said. I'm confident that we will be able to address the concerns that Turkey has expressed in a way that doesn't delay membership. So Stoltenberg says there's no problem. And Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, held talks with Mevlut, I'll not even attempt that surname, Turkey's foreign minister in Berlin yesterday, and said he was confident consensus would be reached. This is the process, he said, and NATO is a place of dialogue. So how do you like that, gentlemen? NATO is a place of dialogue. It's not a out of date, defunct military alliance that's now spending its time stirring up wars in strong countries and bombing weak ones.
Before I get Patrick to answer that, I just wanted to make the point that Stoltenberg, during his press conference, by the way, he wasn't there in person because he has tested positive for COVID, he said. But one of the things the language that he was using, Patrick, was it's sovereign in Finland or sovereign countries. They're entitled to make up their own minds and make their own decisions. And of course, this is exactly the rhetoric that we had from NATO over Ukraine's membership.
Same argument, yeah.
Yes.
So they don't believe in the indivisibility of security, which is an international tradition. So again, we're shifting into this kind of liberal internationalist by the letter and using international law as it's convenient, as and when, and ignoring realist international relations. But as David pointed out with Turkey, they're definitely smoothing that over. Croatia was also a potential a party there that could basically throw a spanner into the works. They look to be more coming on side now that this objection with Turkey is being worked on. Turkey also wants a lift on the banning of arms sales as well. And I believe that's in some way connected with their position on the Kurds vis-a-vis these Scandinavian countries. So again, this is all Erdogan is, and as we'll show in a minute, there's always an opportunity to angle for some leverage. Turkey will always put its hand in and do either hold something up or take an adversarial position that you might surprise people. And almost every time, what they're doing is angling for some kind of leverage. But as David pointed out there, this was the pivotal move here, was the dramatic U-turn by the Social Democrats in Sweden. And it still leaves people wondering, this is the leader here, Magdalena Andersson. It's clear from our freedom from alliances has served Sweden well, but our conclusion now is that it will not serve us well in the future. That's an ominous statement. Who knows what will happen in the future with regards to the expansion of this war, if it does expand, and you're going to look back at statements like this as very, very pivotal in history. Now, Italy is also a potential problem here in this. This is Salvini. What's he saying? Does pushing NATO's borders to Russia's borders bring peace closer? Asks Matteo Salvini. He's head of the Northern League in Italy. It is one thing to send economic and military aid at the beginning of the crisis. It is another matter to do it now. It is necessary to achieve peace, and sending weapons will not help, added Salvini. So will this level of influence change Italy's position on this issue? Maybe, maybe not. But it is interesting to see there's some objection there. Obviously, the Northern League traditionally wanting to reestablish ties with Russia and bypass sanctions and things like that. So there is a schism there. But here's the schism that you don't see in the media. Nobody's talking about Hungary. It's been very quiet. We just picked this up off the Daily News of Hungary. Will Orban hinder Sweden and Finland from joining NATO? Because you have to have a unanimous vote amongst NATO member states in order to make this deal final regarding Sweden and Finland. So is Hungary is definitely an outlier in terms of Europe. They are in almost every policy, including allowing NATO to use Hungarian land or overland or airspace or whatever to ferry weapons into Ukraine. Also on the Russian gas issue, Hungary has been an outlier on that, not going along with Brussels, not going along with the Americans and the British diktats on Russian oil and gas and energy. So are they going to do the same on NATO? Will they do the same on NATO? That's a good question. So that, and the fact that it's not really being talked about in the Western media tells me that there might be something there. We'll see.
Okay, well, of course, who's leading this charge for expansion of NATO? It is the UK, because, of course, NATO's being hesitant. So the UK, as we reported last week, was over to Finland and Sweden to make bilateral defence agreements, saying that we will ride to your rescue whether you join NATO or not. Well, clearly that has moved forward and they are joining NATO, but nonetheless, the UK is leading the charge. And so just to get an idea of where the UK wants to see NATO go next, let's just have a listen to what Liz Truss said at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting.
Good morning. I'm here in Berlin at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting. We were very pleased to be joined by our friends Finland and Sweden. If they do apply to join NATO, the UK is strongly supportive of that. We're also working closely with the Ukrainians and the Poles and others to make sure that Ukraine has NATO standard defence. It's also important today that we focus on a global NATO, because as well as protecting Euro-Atlantic security, we also need to watch out for Indo-Pacific security too. Thank you.
What message are you sending to Vladimir?
So, David, Russia now, China tomorrow.
Yes, and the view is that China will make a move on Taiwan, which is always possible because they are reestablishing their, the Han Empire, as I mentioned before. This is a pretty expansionist state, and the plan is, again, I suspect, to use economic and blockade power rather than put aircraft carriers into the range of Chinese missiles and US Marines on the shores of Taiwan. So it will be weapons, it will be economic blockade, economic shutdown, excluding China from SWIFT, excluding China from the oil and mineral and metal imports that it needs in order to function. It requires a huge amount of commodity imports for the Chinese economy to function, and look to destroy the economy as a means of war. That's the strategy, and then the military part really has just to enable that and give it time to work. That's the strategy that's being used against Russia, and it's a strategy that will be used against China. It's unclear whether this strategy is viable against such large continental opponents, however.
It's also unclear whether it's viable, bearing in mind how reliant the West is on China for production of many, many things. But Patrick, we mentioned this article on the program on Friday.
Well, on this issue of arms buildup, we didn't have time to complete this in the interest of time on Friday. But this is, again, an article here. This is on Sputnik International. This is banned in the United Kingdom. So if you're in the UK, your ISPs have been instructed by the government to block all the main Russian media outlets. But this is an important piece here. Sleepwalking into disaster, how U.S. establishment lost fear of escalating the Ukraine crisis. And the person talking about this here is Vladimir Goldstein. He's a professor at Brown University. I believe he's the chair of the Department of Slavic Studies there. That's an Ivy League university. He is unable to be seen by the British public on this interview, so we thought we'd share this with you. And this is an important point. Besides myopia and the self-defeating dimension of censorship, one should highlight two obvious facts related to censorship and the dismissal of alternative interpretations as propaganda. He's talking about our governments here. And these are those 2 points, which are important. First, governments resort to this tactic to achieve some sort of consensus, which they don't want to be challenged. Indeed, ever since the violent overthrow of the legitimate government in Kiev in 2014, the Western consensus has been established, and that is Ukraine is resisting Russian aggression. This aggression is getting more and more out of hand and is bound to spread further. To stop it, we need a stronger NATO. So, dear taxpayers, get ready to pay more for NATO expansion and build up the military. That's point number one. I think that is a quite astute point by Professor Goldstein. And there's the second point. The second is the war hysteria and the unchallenged demonization of the other side serve one additional purpose, a diversion from all sorts of failures by the government. He's talking about Western governments, but he could also easily be talking about the government in Ukraine as well. And then just further on from that, so I am not surprised that numerous Western governments, British and American in particular, have decided to resort to various forms of modern censorship for the sake of these two myopic goals, military buildup and diversion, says Vladimir Goldstein. And you can follow him on social media if you can't read some of these media outlets.
And just very briefly mention, of course, that consensus has a name, and it's called the Rapid Response Mechanism. Again, a British-led initiative brought to the G7 in 2017 and agreed by the G7 in 2017, a common narrative. And that is absolutely what we're seeing.
An enforced consensus throughout the media and throughout government. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Azovstal then, and well, Eurovision as well.
Well, this is the segue to the Azovstal drama here. The Eurovision Song Contest was, when was it, this weekend?
Yes, it was Saturday night.
Yeah, and Friday we said that Ukraine was going to win.
Yes.
It was a fait accompli. Well, here's The Guardian, who obviously loves covering these sort of cultural postmodern extravaganzas here.
I draw the line at calling it a cultural, but anyway, that's it.
Well, so Ukraine wins the 2022 Eurovision Song Contest, not without controversy. There was some fraud on the voting, whatever, but by and by, they've won here. But this is the image the media is not showing too much. This the most bizarre character here. The BBC has airbrushed this sort of sambo, hip-hop, breakdancing, b-boy, part of this orchestra here. They airbrushed him out because it's really kind of disconcerting, the whole imagery. This is, as Eurovision goes, Mike, this is extremely even bizarre by Eurovision standards here. But nonetheless, Azovstal, the holdouts in Mariupol, the Azov battalion that are hiding underneath the Azovstal plant that we talked about, they actually became a subject of the Eurovision Song Contest during their at the end of their song. They called out for help to save these militants. We've got that video clip. Let's watch that.
I ask all of you, please help Ukraine, Mariupol. Help Azovstal right now.
Okay, well, that's pretty clear.
So they're calling out help the Azov battalion fighters that are trapped under Azovstal, that won't surrender. Anybody help these poor militants there. So here's Mariupol. Here's a shot here overhead. This is what it looks like, total devastation in this industrial corridor here. So this is the Azovstal plant, and these are the holdouts from the Azov battalion. I'm pairing them up with NATO, Mike, because they are armed, backed, and advised by NATO. So Azov battalion is under the NATO umbrella effectively here. And there's Volin, we showed him before, Kalinia, and also Ilya. So these are the sort of public faces of the Azovstal holdouts there from the Azov battalion. And so we'll move that there. So this is what they're saying. This is the message. Surrender is not an option. So they've been offered multiple opportunities to surrender. They've refused to do it. But at the same time, and this is where it gets bizarre, Mike, at the same time, this is the message. you must rescue us now. So we won't surrender, we need to be rescued. So effectively, they're kind of wanting to suspend the rules of war for their particular situation here. It is the most bizarre thing. So you must rescue us now. They've called out to Elon Musk. They've got world leaders on the phone. They've sent their wives out to see the Pope. We'll show you that in a second here. There's one of the characters there. That's the Ilya Semyenko. And I just want to remind people that it was only a couple of days before that shot. He didn't have an eye patch. I don't know what's going on there. I just thought I'd throw that out because the Western media are really using these characters to kind of represent this issue. They're building a kind of a mythology with this. Are they going to be martyrs, or are they going to be POWs? Or are they going to be rescued and be heroes? Those are the outcomes, and we don't know what the Hollywood ending is going to be for this particular story. And that's exactly what it's shaping up to be. That's Ilya right there. No eye patch. I don't know what happened. Maybe he knocked his eye out in the couple of days between those photos here. But Turkey, Erdogan riding to the rescue. He's offering a sea evacuation here. They've got some of the fighters there from, this isn't from the basement. That's a previous photo, I think, from, I believe, one of the plants that was used as a field hospital. But nonetheless, Erdogan is moving in, trying to create some leverage there. He's got deals in horse trading with Russia and Syria, plenty of it. So he's imposed himself here, much to the chagrin of Moscow, no doubt. So he's ready, but it's not going to happen because Russia will not approve this transfer at the moment because it's in Russian-held territory, Mariupol, and the fighters want to be evacuated via Berdansk, which is nearby. Who knows why they want to be moved from Mariupol port to that port? I'm not sure, but things are getting constantly added to their list of demands. They're begging and demanding at the same time, begmanding, basically here. So, and Kadyrov, he is the mercurial Chechnyan leader here, Ramzan Kadyrov. He's like the Donald Trump of Telegram in Russia. That's the best way I can describe it. This is what he's saying to Erdogan. He's saying the administration of President Erdogan was ready to evacuate the Nazis of the Azov regiment trapped in the basements of Azovstal. With all due respect to the leader of the Muslim state, I would like to remind you that the Azov regiment is a fascist Nazi criminal armed formation that is involved to numerous atrocities and killings of civilian population in Donbass. And Kadyrov finished this off. In the cellars of Azovstal, these fascist criminals keep civilians, using them as human shields. The members of this bandit organization are known in Ukraine and beyond for their regular statements insulting the great Islamic values and ridiculing the religion of Islam in general. So he's basically trying to put the kibosh on Erdogan's desire to rescue these guys here. It doesn't look like it's going to happen at the moment, but who knows what things, there could be some kind of a deal brokered. But this is the really interesting part here. You know about the White Helmets, Bana, how they did their Western tour during the Syrian conflict to kind of drum up support for the war effort. Well, these are basically, I don't know what we can call them. They're calling them the fighters' wives. But if we just change that headline there, Nazi Azov battalion wives called for entire garrison to be evacuated, it changes things. So this is completely omitted from most of the coverage that the Azov battalion are kind of a Nazi affiliated or a Nazi organization. So what we're going to call is, we'll just call these the Azov WAGs. So they're doing their European tour right now, lobbying to get their husbands and boyfriends, fiancés released. And they even went to Rome here, Mike. This is a fantastic one. Please don't let them die. Wives of Azov fighters beg Pope. So they've gone to the Pope and they said, Pope, can you do something for us? You know, can you get our husbands released? Can you send the Pope mobile? I don't know what they're expecting there, but just look at that headline. Now, if we just change that to please don't let them die, wives of Azov Nazis beg the Pope, it changes the whole character of the story. So I'm just giving you an example of how our propaganda and how our media can sculpt a narrative by omitting certain details in order to sell it to the Western population there. So again, there they are, and this is the most interesting of all the stories here. The Azov wives or husbands are being betrayed by Ukrainian traitors. So they're turning on the Ukrainian, blaming Ukrainian military for betraying their husbands and somehow responsible for them being in this predicament where they're stuck. They're surrounded. The city of Mariupol is totally controlled by the Russian forces right now. So let's look at what they're saying. And this piece by the Telegraph is a propaganda masterpiece. It really is. This is a master class in propaganda. Let's look at how this one shapes up. So this is what they're saying. Currently on a tour of Europe, so they're doing a European tour, Azov WAGs, the women this week spoke to the Pope, spoke to Pope Francis and said they're hoping that he might intervene. He said he wanted to prepare a humanitarian corridor for Azovstal, but Putin doesn't want to let the soldiers go. Say the wives there's a couple of them. Some of them are quite young as well, so and there's some of them in their 30s. And they go on here. Now they're now in Paris, and they hope to visit Britain to ask Boris Johnson for help as well. And they've yet to secure their visas. I spoke to my husband last night. They are out of food and they're out of water, says Katerina Prokopenko. So again, a desperate situation for the fighters there. Olga, here she's 31. She's saying of her husband, Sergei, he's wounded. He told me they're out of medicine. Their wounds are beginning to rot and more. They're just lying down, using their internal will. That is how they hold on. So it's very inspirational. So they're really pushing this, the hero narrative here. So again, Russia's offered multiple corridors for the wounded for, it's almost a month now, multiple times. They refused every time because they said, we can't surrender. And here they go on. Now this is where they're wanting to, I said, redefine warfare. And this is what's going on in the media. It's weird. It's not a war, says Hannah. Instead, the Azov fighters are being starved and shelled. It's a siege. In fact, I would say it's just murder. So it's no longer war, but this is murder by Putin of the Azov regiment. So it's an incredible jump, isn't it? So, and we'll go on here, and the postmodernist reframing continues. Of course, nobody knows better than Russians upon whose psyche the Nazi blockade of Leningrad remains etched. The awful realities of siege warfare. Now they are inflicting the same pitiless constriction once visited upon them on their desperate enemies. And this is again from the Telegraph here. So for many Ukrainians, it was, wow, the war has started, says Yulia, but we have been fighting this war since 2014. That's why they, like Putin, don't talk about February's invasion as a war. They merely regard it as an escalation. So the Telegraph is framing here is that this was some kind of a war with Russia since 2014, when in fact Russia wasn't occupying Donetsk and Lugansk. This was a civil war. So the Telegraph is involved in heavy reframing here, and they're using the story of the WAGs, the Azov WAGs, in order to advance these narratives here, which are the same narratives that our politicians are advancing. So Yulia suggesting here, and this is the betrayal of Volodymyr Baranyuk, commander of Ukraine's 36th Marine Brigade in Mariupol, had close contacts with the Russians, she says. The reality was he turned out to be a traitor and went into Russian captivity even when Marines still were there. So she's saying he's a traitor for getting captured by the Russians, and that's why the Azov regiment is trapped there. Their husbands are trapped there. And just to go on, every Azov soldier who has surrendered during the last 8 years has been tortured and killed by the Russians, says Yulia here. She goes on to say the Russians made propaganda videos with him, and then they tortured him and killed him and took a photo, sent his dead body, sent it to the mother. So we can't verify if any of this happened. I couldn't find it, but the Telegraph is printing it as if it happened, as they say, not challenging it. So that's something to flag there, a possible something to question here. And this is what they're saying. That's why the whole world must understand that captivity is not an option for the Azov regiment. So you see how they built the narrative here. So they're saying this is why they're not surrendering, because Russia will kill and torture anyone that they capture. And so when in fact the evidence that we've seen and we've even showed on this program is that actually the opposite is also true.
Yes.
Le Monde just completed an investigation, French publication Le Monde, showing undoubtedly who tortured and killed the Russian POWs, ID'd the person who was in charge, and put him at the place, confirmed the location and the timeline, the day, the hour, everything. So that's an open and shut case. That's gone to the UN. The UN has acknowledged that Ukraine is torturing and summarial executions of Russian POWs. So that's the opposite narrative of what you're seeing in these pieces like the Telegraph. And the thing that surprises me, Mike, about all these is that at no point will any of these journalists push back on any of these claims and ask for any verification. It just gets printed as if it's fact. And not that we're surprised by that, because we see that every day.
Yeah.
But again, this is a high stakes war. This is potentially a world war. So the Azov drama, it encapsulates so many different issues that are used to shape how this conflict is being portrayed globally.
David, any thoughts on that?
Yes, and what the Telegraph and others are not getting at is what's the key question here, which is why can't they surrender? Right? Two possible explanations. They'll be tortured and then shot out of hand by the Russians, or they will be made to stand trial for war crimes that they have committed by the Russians, and quite possibly would face the death penalty for what they've done themselves. This is all about where you think the rule of law actually lies. Whether you think either party or one of the parties can be trusted to have a fair process. The West can't really point any fingers here, because after the Second World War there was victor's justice at Nuremberg, encouraged and egged on by the Russians. So there's plenty to suggest that there might be some truth in both narratives, but there's no effort by the British press to actually uncover it. And that's the big disappointment there in terms of the nature of the reporting.
Yes.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that Ukrainian POWs are being treated good by Russians in captivity. There's scores of videos about that. But clearly these guys, as David said, they definitely don't want to be captured. And they've even said themselves that we're either facing a prison sentence or a death penalty. And they're not saying it's because of what they've done, as David alluded to correctly. They're saying that's just because that's what Russians do to people like us, basically.
Yeah, okay, right. We'll need to move on and jump forward in the schedule a little bit and say welcome to Katy-Jo. Well, Katy-Jo, what would you like to start with here? Well, first of all, before we get onto your main topic, did you have any thoughts on the Eurovision Song Contest, which was such a wonderful event on Saturday night?
Do you know what? It was really funny, actually, because I've never watched the Eurovision Song Contest. And on Saturday, we had family and friends over. And my mum had said that there'd been people talking about, how we must vote for Ukraine. And I thought, okay, well, let's have a little watch. Let's have a little watch of it. And, it was clear to see that every single person was voting for them. Obviously, they were virtue signaling, because they were terrible. It was awful. The UK were miles ahead. Normally it's nil point for the UK, but they were miles ahead, top of the table, and then all the votes came in, and Ukraine just jumped to the top, like we all thought they would.
Yes.
So it was like it always is. It's political, isn't it?
Yes.
And I never watch it. I can't be bothered with it. So.
No, well, this is quite right, and it always has been a political thing. But look, we want to talk about motherhood here.
Motherhood. It was Mother's Day in America last week, and Calvin Klein, their Mother's Day campaign featured all different types of families. There was a mother breastfeeding her baby and an interracial couple, and both these shots were absolutely gorgeous, beautiful shots. But you can imagine the controversial shot that caused the huge divide in opinion was of the pregnant trans man. Roberto, who is heavily pregnant in these photos, poses with his partner Erica, a transgender woman. The couple's words on the campaign read, "We can reproduce biologically or from the heart." How about both? I think that's what normally happens. And today, in support of women and mothers around the world, we highlight the reality of new families. The campaign has received 30,000 likes and hundreds of comments in support, such as, "I love to see this anti-exclusivity campaign by a brand as legendary as yours. How nice, long live diversity. Thank you for sharing different types of motherhood." That last statement says it all for me, motherhood. When you decide you want to be a man, you can't decide you want to have a baby. That gift, that privilege is for women only. It always has been and it always will be. The campaign has received obviously a lot of backlash as well from people who are outraged by the advert. Obviously, these were straight away classed as transphobic. And in an article by Ariana Bayo, for Indie 100, she specifically states, "People with misinformed ideas about pregnancy and gender took to Twitter." Misinformed ideas about pregnancy and gender. Would that be the idea or the fact maybe that women have babies? I don't know. I'm obviously terribly misinformed. Many have boycotted the Calvin Klein campaign over this. One thing I was really pleased to see, though, was that the couple have called their son Noah. The baby boy has been born, and they've stated that he is a boy. So they're not actually doing this, playing this stupid game of, we don't know what he is, and we're not going to assign either gender to him and let him choose. So that was at least something. That was something good to read. Now the term chest feeding. Yes, bring the next slide on. The term chest feeding is now widely used. After having a conversation with a friend of mine actually the other day, people are actually starting to use this in everyday language. She was having a conversation with a friend of hers and she was actually saying chest feeding in their conversation. This man gives birth to, this was a few years ago, gave birth to a little boy after not knowing he was pregnant for 10 weeks. He was thrilled with his wonderful team of midwives that used the appropriate pronouns. And if they made any mistakes, they would always apologise. I bet they did. It could cost them their job if they didn't. He was able to chest feed his son and was really happy about this, as he knows it's the best start for him. Although he has since had surgery to remove his breasts, which felt amazing, he said, although he's sad that he won't be able to chest feed any future children. He's holding off any more surgery as he would love a bigger family. Confused is not the word. He's had a baby after starting his transitioning to becoming a man, breastfed his baby, and then he's had his breast removed, but he still wants more children in the future. I think the act of having children is actually quite a selfish act in a way for anyone who does it. You have children because you want children. It's, you bring them into this life. They don't ask to come here. So the role of the mother, for me, I feel carries huge responsibilities. And surely anyone that wants the best for their baby, such as this man, knows that breastfeeding is the best thing. So why on earth he's had his breast removed if he wants more children? I don't know. It's absolutely nonsensical. But the next article I have, which is a way we're going to, we don't need mother anymore. We can completely exterminate the mother because the artificial intelligence nanny has arrived. An article a couple of months ago tells us how an AI may be used in conjunction to optimize the generation of human life. The comparison to the Matrix is scary. AI assists the development via algorithms and artificial wombs. The AI nanny might aid the growth of human kids in a long-term embryo culture device and feeds them with an optimized mix of nutritious fluids. It sounds like some crazy conspiracy, just like most of the subjects I cover, but it's not. This is happening. This is reality now, It won't happen anytime soon, they say. They are obviously using animals at the moment as experimenting, and this sentence made me laugh out loud, as experimenting on human embryos older than 2 weeks is prohibited under international law. And I say that, it made me laugh, obviously, because experimental and deadly vaccines, the removal of tissues from aborted fetus babies while they're still alive for cell lines, organ harvesting. These are totally acceptable, are they? Totally ethical. It's just nuts. So they've said there, of course, this is not everything is a hopeless dystopia. There are certain advantages to it. In the past, he's speaking like giving birth is already in the past. In the past, the process of producing kids with people has been a lengthy, drawn out, and unpleasant process. How would he know? That's what I want to know. How would he know? I absolutely loved being pregnant with my girls. And even though I was incredibly poorly with my son, I would never have had it any other way. They say in this article it could aid mothers who can't have children and need a surrogate. After all, the population is about to start shrinking by the billions by the end of the century, and fertility rates around the globe are collapsing at a frightening rate. I wonder why that is. What on earth could be causing that then? So we now are, how are we going to feed these babies? How are we going to feed them? Well, don't fear, they're onto that one as well. Forbes found an article last year titled Got Milk about a company called BIOMILQ. They are creating human breast milk in a lab. They have successfully made the world's first cell-cultured human milk from mammary cells outside the breast. When you listen to the interview with Michelle Egger, the company's CEO and co-founder, she explains that this breakthrough is as close to breast milk as possible. It contains the majority of nutritional complexities of breast milk with the practicality of formula. While BIOMILQ's 100% human milk lacks antibodies, the nutritional and bioactive composition of our product is closer to that of breast milk than to bovine-based infant formula. Our product will support immune development, microbiome population, intestinal maturation, and brain development in ways that bovine-based formula fundamentally cannot. I would say there is a need for a better alternative than bovine-based formulas for these mothers who are unable to breastfeed their babies. Babies' formulas have the most horrendous ingredients in them. Corn syrup is normally top of the list. I was lucky enough to breastfeed both my daughters, absolutely loved it for about 10 months. And I was devastated when I couldn't breastfeed my son. He was born with dysphagia, one of the worst cases this country's ever seen. He couldn't even cope with his own saliva. So I expressed every 2 hours, day and night, for about 4 months, until the stress of everything, all his operations and living in the hospital, meant that I couldn't produce any more milk for him. And when we were in hospital, he was also giving this terrible formula that caused him to develop necrotizing enterocolitis, which is where the bowel dies. And we had a terrible time. And I was sent home with a baby that could only cope with this really watery milk. And because he was gagging constantly, he just used to vomit all the time. So I researched constantly the constitution of formula milk and baby milk, and came up with my own formula. I used goat's milk, raw goat's milk, and I added healthy fats such as ghee, olive oil, hemp oil. I added molasses for sugars. I added so many whole food, real foods to his milk, and he came on beautifully. 5 years Tommy was tube fed solely for. He only ever had real food down his feeding tube. When I told his I've said this before on the program, when I told his gastroenterologist and his surgeon, they were so shocked and alarmed that, and I was so worried by their reaction, I actually didn't take him back because I thought they were going to take him away from me. But later on, now years later, when I see different consultants, they wish that other parents would do the same. So there are alternatives out there, that we can use. We don't have to go down the formula route. And I do hope that those that are experiencing this crisis in America with the formula crisis, those that can afford it will look for other alternatives, because it's absolutely horrendous out there. But this isn't going to help those with the low, that fall into that low bracket. Income bracket. That's just not going to help them. They are reliant on on free infant formula from the state. And even worse with this story, this crisis, is that according to Kat Kamat, an American politician and political advisor, pallets of baby formula are being sent to the border centres for illegal migrants. She posted a photo on her Twitter of the shelves at the Ursula Process Centre at the US border, packed with baby formula. And the second photo is what it's like where she lives, completely empty shelves. President Joe Biden's administration is struggling to respond, apparently, according to the Mail, and they are unable to reassure parents when there will be more formula and where they can turn to for help. The administration is calling for a crackdown on price gouging, as formula has been going up to $120 a can, as desperate parents are trying to feed their children. That is an incredibly alarming story, and my heart goes out to all those parents. They must be absolutely tearing their hair out and not knowing what to do.
Well, Patrick, thank you very much for that, Katy-Jo. But Patrick, is the baby formula problem in the States typical of Biden?
Who knows what's typical? Everything's typical of Biden now, but this is one of those crises that is not doing him any favors going into the midterms for his party or his administration. And here's the problem here. Look at this. This is the biggest producing plant, I believe the Abbott plant in Michigan, Abbott Laboratories. This is the biggest one in the United States. The FDA shut it down. The FDA shut it down in February because of a suspected bacterial poisoning of two infants, and they didn't reopen it. They've been dragging their heels to reopen it. So
hold on. Let me understand this. The FDA and other institutions in the United States have demanded the continuing vaccination of people and children in the United States, despite the adverse reactions. But 2 kids have adverse reactions to baby milk, and they shut down the factory and leave it shut down.
Alleged reactions due to the formula from this plant. Now, if this produces a significant percentage of the country's baby formula, Mike, shutting that down, your government has to know that shutting that down is going to create a major crisis, okay? Not only that, you have the Pfizer documents coming out. There's also talk about whether the spike proteins passed through breastfeeding. And so that's going to put a chilling effect on some others thinking, well, if I've been triple vaxxed or double vaxxed with the mRNA vaccine, then maybe I should use baby formula just in case, okay? So again, this is a huge screw up by the government, and they should have known, and this is the type of thing, it's either gross incompetence or there's some other, who knows, some nefarious agenda behind the scenes. But we should also point out that who is the major investor here in the bio fake baby formula? It's none other than, of course, Bill Gates, who I believe provided the seed capital, I think, for that same biomilk company. If not, it's one of the other firms vying for this. Yeah, biomilk,
Right.
what Katy-Jo had said before. So again, Bill Gates, as if by magic, he's there with the solution in the background, waiting to be deployed.
Yes. Okay. Well, we're pretty much out of time, so we'll leave it with this report from you, Katy-Jo, where the headline here is Florida Church hold Pride conference with drag show for high schoolers.
It gets crazier, doesn't it? This takes place on the 21st of this month, and the flyer apparently states the event is an exploration of LGBTQ-related issues affecting today's youth and will feature a drag show. This event is for 12 to 18-year-olds. The programme for the conference includes a drag show from one of our local drag queens, several presentations on mental health issues for gay and transgender individuals, a presentation on sexuality and science by the evolutionary biologist, a presentation on inclusive sex education by a representative from Planned Parenthood, none other than Planned Parenthood, and a presentation on political activism and advocacy. However, Florida are fighting hard to protect our children. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that Florida has introduced a new legislation, the HB 1557 bill, which was signed into the law last month. It prohibits public school teachers from discussing the existence of LGBTQ people in any capacity from kindergarten to 3rd grade. So Florida are on this, and the press secretary for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis shared a report on Twitter by the news outlet Florida's Voice that indicated the organisers planned to use parking lots at local schools for free shuttle transportation to the conference. The district shot the plan down. The district was never informed nor contacted about this event, the district said. Collier County Public Schools is not a sponsor of the event, which is being held at a private facility. CCPS also neither authorised nor approved the transportation of CCPS students to and from district school sites by the event organisers. Any inference to the contrary is fully rejected by CCPS. To this end, CCPS has spoken with the event organiser and explained that the information on the registration form and any associated flyer must be immediately corrected to reflect that CCPS is not a co-sponsor, nor will it allow its school sites to be used as transit points for the pickup and drop-off of students for this event, the district added. Unfortunately, not all schools are like CCPS. Three schoolboys are being taken to court in the US state of Wisconsin after refusing to call their peers by their preferred pronouns. I know. The students from Kiel Middle School have been charged under the sexual harassment legislation, which deals with serious crimes such as rape, dating violence, quid pro quo, sexual favours, and other sexual violent crimes. Rosemary Rabideau, one of the boys' mothers, in an interview tells us how she went into shock when her son's school called her to make her aware of the investigation. She says, "I immediately went into shock. I'm thinking sexual harassment, that's rape, that's inappropriate touching, that's incest. What has my son done?" Well, he's done none of those things, poor woman. She says the investigating principal said he's been allegedly charged with sexual harassment for not using proper pronouns. "I thought it wasn't real. I thought this has got to be a gag, a joke. One has nothing to do with the other." The Wisconsin Institution for Law and Liberty is defending the accused boys, thankfully, and refutes claims that misuse of pronouns is not covered by Title IX, the legislation that protects people from discrimination based on sex in the education system. In an online statement, WILL Deputy Counsel Luke Berg said school administrators can't force minor students to comply with their preferred mode of speaking, and they certainly shouldn't be slapping 8th graders with the Title IX investigations for what amount to protected speech. This is a terrible precedent to set with enormous ramifications. Absolutely, I agree with you there, Luke Berg. Thank you for speaking sense. I did send in a clip of the mum being interviewed.
Yes. Look, I think we'll keep, if you don't mind, Katy-Jo, we'll keep the clip for extra because we
Sure.
are out of time. So why don't we just move on to this final slide here, which is bullied to death, Drake Hardman, age 12.
Yeah, I just wanted to compare that to what actually really happens. So bullying in school is absolutely horrific. This isn't even a case of bullying. You know, I read the most horrific and heartbreaking, tragic story last week of a little boy, Drake Hardman, who was only 12 when he hung himself with his favourite hoodie because the bullying he was enduring was so unbearable. He came home days before the suicide with a black eye and initially lied about how he'd got it. And then he later confided to his sister and he told her that snitches get stitches. His poor parents had tried to step in by contacting the school, which, you know, they just suspended the alleged bully. And that's it. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because would it have been different if he was being bullied for being trans? Would he have had more support? Would they have taken harsher, you know, actions on the bullies? I have a feeling the answer is yes. And I'm absolutely sick to death of seeing the systems and the institutions that are meant to be protecting our children, letting them down. More than that, failing them. failing them completely in every single way.
Okay, thank you for that. David, any comments?
No, it's just thank you for Katie for bringing these things up. The war for right thinking and well-doing goes on against many who are treating our children in particular as means of achieving the political and cultural ends, a lot of which come from very dark motivations indeed.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, we are out of time, so let's just end with a couple of final slides. First of all, David, Grandpa, what was it like living through the collapse of the Western world? Is the text that goes with this?
And Grandpa illustrates it with 3 Calvin Klein adverts from 1999. A very athletic and attractive woman in a very small bathing costume. From 2019, a morbidly obese woman in a much larger set of Calvin Klein underwear. And from 2022, a woman who thinks she's a man but is pregnant with her partner who is a man that thinks he's a woman. And I'm a bit confused already. That's a quick summary of the decline of Western civilization.
Yes, and well, the Babylon Bee here, was this one of yours, Patrick?
Oh yeah, well, this is the baby formula thing. Starving American babies disguise themselves as Ukrainian soldiers in hopes of getting some of the 40 billion in federal aid. There he is there, one of Zelensky's regiment there, hoping to get his hands on some baby formula.
Okay, well, we got to leave it there. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us today. Thank you to David and to Katy-Jo. We'll be back in a few minutes on the main live stream with some extra. But otherwise, we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Wednesday, and hope to see you then. Bye-bye.